let's get to the reason we're all here tonight. Jake Knapp. So I'm sure most of you already know he's a creator of the Design Sprint. He used to work at Google Ventures and Google, working on Gmail and Hangouts, Microsoft Encarta. His previous book, Sprint, is a huge bestseller. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. And I'm super excited that we got to get him here for his new book, Make Time. It's not even coming out to the public until a week from now, September 25th. So again, a big thank you to our sponsors for getting it out a week early. And we are going to hear from Jake the first time talk sharing advice from Make Time. So I'm super excited for that. So let's give a warm welcome to Jake Knapp.
Wow, it's really great to be doing this talk. I've been really stressed about it, and it feels better to start doing it than to be thinking about doing it. Before I get into it, I want to thank Dan for making this happen. So please, round of applause for Dan. You guys. Dan with me, which is a huge, no one should have to do that. And he also got the books here, which is, it's not straightforward to get books like ripped away from the publisher before the book comes out, because the book doesn't come out until next week. It's really a really big deal, and it's super, super cool. Tons of behind the scenes work, and as you can see, in front of the scenes work. So thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. I'm going to tell you guys about this new book, and I am going to give you kind of I don't want to give too much of it away because you have the book, so you'll be able to look in it, and hopefully you'll find it easy to use. If not, I don't want to hear. But hopefully you will. And so instead of telling you about everything that's in it and all the different tactics and techniques, I want to talk about where it comes from, and hopefully that'll entice you enough to read a book that you already own. So I'm gonna start by telling a story that never really ties in directly to the presentation, but maybe you'll see the parallel. It's kind of an analogy. And I don't know if any of you have ever visited Japan, but I visited Japan last year for the first time. And for those of you who've met me out in the lobby or previously, you'll know that I'm very tall. And Japan is not really designed for the very tall. And I was staying with my family in an Airbnb, and there was a little bathroom in there. And you may think you know where I'm going with the bathroom, but it's not. It actually was just that there was the bathroom and then a separate room where the sink was, and then that was even a second room. So there's like two doorways right next to each other, and they were really low doorways. And many times, more than once, more than 3 times, more than 5 times, I got in a situation where I was like washing my hands coming through those doors. And if you ever hit your head, there's a thing that your body does when it gets hit in the head, because your head's really important, right? It's got important stuff in it, where your head like just recoils, you're just like, I don't want to get hit again by that thing, right? It's like, it hurts, and you're like, oh. And but the other doorway was right there, so I would just like, and then I would just go back and forth, just ping ponging between these, and it would happen. I mean, it happens fast, but it happened enough times that I could understand what was going on and couldn't stop it. Like, I'm just like, I can't stop doing this, and going back and forth between those things. And then finally I would like kind of step away, and life is like that sometimes. And that's what you'll see. I'm going to talk about that idea of being caught between two doorways, ping-ponging. And in many ways in our lives, I think we're like Jake in the Japanese bathroom more than we realize. So anyway, going to go back in time and start this. This story begins for me in 2003. And so this animated GIF here implies that we're traveling back in time. We're in a time travel machine. So in the year 2003, it was a very momentous year for me because my son was born, my oldest son, my first child. And so here's me, and here he is, and he just kind of appeared like that. Just kind of appeared. And so my wife and I had our first baby, and it was. And I was like, hey, kind of figuring out, like what to do with a baby, and I was home with my wife and with Luke, that's his name, and I spent some time at home, and then went back to work. And when I went back to work, my whole perception of time had changed. It had been altered because I realized that while I was at work, while stuff was going on at work, and I'm in the office, that there was this other stuff going on that I was missing. So I wasn't at home with Luke. So every day, every moment when I was at work, I wasn't at home. And I started to really think about, man, like I have got to make good use of my time. There was a very sort of practical reason for that. I wanted to not work such long hours as I used to work. And I was working at Microsoft at this time, and I've kept pretty reasonable hours, but it was just my wife and I. If she was busy late, I would just stay at the office and work later. I wasn't quite so tight with my time. So I thought, well, I want to get home at a reasonable time. But there was this other reason that was kind of a little bit deeper, which was I wanted to make it meaningful that I was going into the office. I was commuting. I lived in Seattle at the time. I was commuting across the lake and going to Microsoft and then coming back. I wanted to make it meaningful that I spent that time there. I wanted to really get something out of it. And so I started thinking like, okay, I need to get better at this. I really need to improve. And so I decided that I had to get productive. And I went on a quest to become as productive as possible. And I was all in on productivity. I read David Allen's Getting Things Done 3 or 4 times. I practically had that. If anybody who's familiar with GTD knows the flow chart, I pretty much had that tattooed on my eyelids. And like I had the full like the file folders and the file cabinets and the electric labeler. I don't know if any of you know what I'm talking about, but the whole works. I experimented over the years with all kinds of different to-do lists. So I had to-do lists in spreadsheets. I had to-do lists on paper in Japanese notebooks that folded out with sticky notes on it with the to-dos. I had to-dos on notepads with plastic sheets over the top that were transparent and whiteboard markers for prioritization. I had all kinds of crazy things. I tried every app for to-dos. And I got really good at it. I was really, really good at it. So I'm working at Microsoft. I am just like on top of my game with to-dos. You give me a task, I will get it back to you before the end of the day and I'll go home. And I was awesome. So in 2007, I left Microsoft and I went to go work at Google because I'm a traitor. But when I got to Google, I was really excited to work there. When I got to Google, it was like a whole new ballgame. I had to figure out how to be productive in this faster paced, kind of more intense world where everybody, it seemed like, had a computer science degree and everybody knew everything about technology. And they were just way ahead of me. So I had to step it up. And I found myself on the Gmail team. I'm a long time email geek. I mean, from the moment I sent my first email, you guys remember like when you'd send Telnet, I don't know if anybody remembers, but like, green text on a black screen. Like I was like, this is amazing. Speed of light messages. I loved it. And so to be working on Gmail for me was like the coolest thing, right? I'm like an inbox zero disciple. I'm working on email and I get to work on this project called Priority Inbox where we're like using machine learning to automatically prioritize the messages and try to make people be able to go through their messages faster. It's like in Nirvana. So 2008, 2009, I get to the point where I'm teaching a class to Googlers about email management and how to get their inbox down to zero. I am just a machine. And in 2010, I start to turn my productive tendencies towards what teams do. In 2010, I created this thing called a design sprint and started running these at Google. In 2011, just starting to get the process off, just starting to experiment with this with a few teams at Google. 2012, I'm just cruising. And then this moment where things change. And so 2012, I'm at home one evening and I am at home with my son, Luke, who's now 8, and my new son, Flynn, who's age baby. And we're sitting on the living room floor and we're building wooden train tracks. It's a great family moment because I'm so productive and so on top of my email and all my tasks and to-dos. I'm home in the evening in time to play with my kids before they go to bed. I'm feeling pretty good about myself, and I'm just sitting there playing with my kids, and I'm just kind of in the zone. And then I hear like a sound coming almost through a tunnel, and I'm like, oh yeah, and I hear this. And I realize that my son Luke is talking to me, and he's like, hey, Dad, why are you looking at your phone? And I didn't really consciously remember taking the phone out of my pocket, and there wasn't really a good reason why I took the phone out. I didn't have an answer for him. And like most people, I had this relationship with my phone where I was sometimes guilty about it. But the phone was so cool. It was so amazing. As somebody who'd worked in technology for my whole life, I was just so enamored with it. And as somebody who loved email, the idea of being able to do email from anywhere, of course I want that. Of course I want that. But at that moment, for some reason, something snapped, because I realized like Luke asked that question. He wasn't like trying to call me out or make me feel bad. He was just curious. What could be on your phone that's so interesting that you wouldn't want to play trains, which is the coolest thing in the world, right? And he was right. There was no good reason for me to be checking my work email in the evening, except that my inbox was like Space Invaders and I wanted to keep it clean. And every time I put the phone away, there was always the possibility something good might be lurking on there for me. So I kind of freaked out at that moment. I dropped the phone and I just thought, oh my God, like what is going on? What have I done with my life choices? And I started to think really hard about what was going on with the phone. The phone, like I said, was such a magical device. I was just sure that it was a good thing, but I started to wonder about the defaults on the phone. So from the very moment that the iPhone came out, by default, it came with email and Safari and stocks, because a serious person would want to be able to find out anything on the internet. They want to be able to follow their investments, and they'd want, of course, be able to send and receive messages. What a powerful tool. It's what a business person would want to have in their pocket, what they should have in their pocket now that it's the future and we have smartphones. And by default, of course, as all these new apps were released, of course I would want those on there. They're free. I can get Facebook for free and Instagram for free. I can get Netflix on my phone. I can access, amazing. Of course I want that. Of course I want YouTube on my phone. Of course I want all these things. By default, I just said yes to everything that came out because I wanted to get my money's worth out of the phone. So it all made sense. But in that moment, when I was looking at my phone and looking at that wall of icons, I was like, this does not make sense. They're calling to me from my pocket, like in the Lord of the Rings, you know, when the ring is like calling to Bilbo Baggins in his hand, just kind of, they were calling to me, and I had to do something about it. So I was so angry with myself. I don't know. I started to, mash the screen, and I started to delete those apps, starting with Golden Axe. Some of you will know this is a reenactment. This is iOS 12, but this was in 2012. So I'm deleting the apps, and it's scary at first, but then I tell myself it's just going to be an experiment. I'm just going to try it for a week, and it starts to feel better and better. But then I'm staring at Gmail, and I'm like, oh my God, I work on the Gmail team. Like, can I do this? And I'm like, they can handle it for a day. I know they can handle it. I deleted it. And it felt amazing. It actually felt amazing to look at the phone without all that stuff. Without all that stuff, it was freeing. It was a sense of relief. It was just crazy. And I thought for sure, like, I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, things are going to get bad. Like, this is going to mess me up. But it felt so good. I was like, I wonder how long I can go without it. And the rest of the evening passed, and nothing happened. There's no disasters. And it turns out I could still check email on my computer. I didn't know that. And the next day, like, I go to work, I'm like commuting to work, and I don't know if somebody sent me an email, and I get to work, and like they had, but it was okay that I hadn't answered it immediately. And days went by, and the week went by, and I didn't even notice that it had gone by. I forgot that I was supposed to end the experiment and install everything again. And months. And it turned out that the iPhone was still amazing. Like, it still had all this cool stuff. It still had maps and a calendar and weather, things that seem so simple and mundane, but they're amazing. Like, they're amazing. It's amazing that you can call a car from your phone. It's amazing that you can send text messages to people with emoji. Like, that's actually amazing. That was enough. And if I remember being like a kid, I was a kid in the 1980s watching Back to the Future. If I saw this, like, without Facebook, without Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff, if somebody came, like if Doc came with the DeLorean and like handed that to me, I would have been like, yeah, that's in the future. That's what I expect. It's perfect. So it was okay. And then I started thinking about just the defaults that existed elsewhere. So this idea of defaults, they're kind of everywhere. And as I was at work digging into this design sprint effort and trying to experiment and refine what would be the perfect way for a team to start a big project, I began to think about the defaults that exist at work. So at work at that moment, and we'll shift now, we're going to shift back to the work track. In 2012, I had just taken a job at Google Ventures. So I left Google and went to go work at Google Ventures, which is another one of the alphabet companies. And they're a venture capital fund investing in startups. And there I had just started my job and met this guy named John Zeratsky. So John Zeratsky is my co-author on Sprint, my co-author on the Make Time book. And from the very beginning, like when I first met him, I kind of hated him. And it would be more fun to say that if he were here, but it's true. When I first met him, I was like, the guy has just got it together a little too much. Like, he's younger than me, he's better looking than me, like seems to just like get all his work done like faster than me. Like, what's going on? I didn't like it. And but over time, I started to work with John, and I realized that we had a lot in common. We were both productivity dorks. For a long time, he'd been way, way into productivity. We'd been experimenting with the same things and some different things. He had tried other things that I hadn't tried, and I had tried some things he hadn't tried. After a few months, I convinced him to try my distraction-free iPhone, and he actually, much to his surprise, liked it. We had been up to that point in our career designing products, but because of our work at Google Ventures working on the sprint process, we started to think about if we can apply that same lens and start to design time. And as we were thinking about kind of the defaults that happen at work, we thought some of those are things you can redesign. So I'll talk about that just really quickly. In 2010, as I mentioned, I had started doing this process that I called a design sprint at Google. And I ran the first one at Google in 2010, and it took a while to run the first sort of couple dozen. I would look for teams who were starting something new, whether it was at ads or Chrome or search or Gmail, whatever, and kind of jumping from team to team, Google X, and trying a few of these sprints, and each time trying to refine the process a bit. But at 2012, when I went to Google Ventures, everything changed. We had so many startups in our portfolio, and they were all starting new things all the time. So it was a huge opportunity to experiment with this method. So over the next few years, we had this really unique opportunity where we got to run about 25 or 30, sometimes even 35 sprints a year. And we were able to continually experiment. And we were able to take a team of people and put them in a room, and we controlled what happened all day long, all week long. And we could compare from week to week to week what worked well, what didn't work. We were able to control things like the activities that we did and the way that we ran conversations, the way we made decisions, the way we, proposed solutions, and the way we tested prototypes. But we were also able to control things like whether or not people could use their phones and their laptops during the workday, and when we took breaks and how long those breaks were, and whether we ate lunch separately or together, whether we allowed laptops at lunch, what kind of snacks we had, when you could go to the bathroom, how long the day was, everything. We were the boss. It was crazy. We were in control of all these teams. And it was really unique. We started to notice some things that we began to apply to our own personal lives as well. They worked for teams, and we thought, gosh, we could do some of these things ourselves. But before I get into that, I want to, if you don't know much about the design sprint, or if you do know, I want to kind of refresh what it is and how it works. So the design sprint, the idea is that you would have one big challenge. Often this makes sense for a team when they're building a new product, when they're starting out on something that's going to cost a lot of time or money. They want to make sure they don't waste that time or money. So they'll invest in a week of time to try to solve the problem and test it. So the way it works is you get a team together, about 5 to 7 people, and you've got a diverse set of skills on that team. So not everybody doesn't look all the same. You don't have all designers or all engineers. It's a diverse set of skills, and you've got a decision maker in the room, and you take 1 week of time, you clear the calendar of all of the normal stuff that's on the calendar, and then instead of going by sort of the defaults that the office runs by and the default way that we run meetings, instead you run a system, and the system is sort of a checklist. That checklist is in the sprint book, and if you've run a sprint, you're familiar with it, but it's sort of one activity after another. And it's a result of all of our years of experimenting with the process. This is what we found out worked every time in every environment. So during the course of that week, there's one focal point for each day. On Monday, the team makes a map of the challenge that they're working on. So the default for many teams, and I've been in this lots of times myself building products, is that you are starting something big, and it's very hard to begin because it's so big, because it's hard to have any conversation without talking about everything at once. Well, let me show you what I mean. So you've got a team full of people, and perhaps the designer sees it one way, and the engineer sees it another way, and the marketer sees it another way, and the product manager sees it another way. And it's very hard to actually talk just about how the system fits together or how you think the whole works without starting to talk about ideas. And once one person talks about an idea, it's hard to not kind of debate that idea. And everybody's got an idea. And some people have a lot of ideas. And this is really frustrating. I think if anybody's been in a meeting like this, you'll know this is like really frustrating, right? And so the change that we made in the sprint was to make that conversation visible and put some structure around it. So instead of talking about everything at once, we would distill down to one key moment, and we would do that through a series of concrete steps. We would change the default. So we would get people talking about it, but as soon as they started to talk about how the system worked, we'd stop the conversation there, and we'd start to organize it on the whiteboard, and we would figure out how everybody saw it and how those things fit together, and we'd simplify that down. And by the end of the day, we would have one target, one key moment that we knew was the one place we should focus our efforts during that sprint week. This was what we should prototype. This is what we should test with our customers at the end of the week. And of course, in this diagram, I'm making it look all very magically simple and easy. It's a lot of hard work if anyone has run a design sprint on Monday to get to that point, but it did make a radical difference for the rest of the week in terms of what we could accomplish. So on Tuesday, the team sketches solutions. And by default, when teams want to solve a problem, you normally do a group brainstorm. This is sometimes actually intentional. Sometimes intentionally, people will say, let's do a group brainstorm. Let's get a lot of sticky notes and we'll group brainstorm together. We'll follow group brainstorm rules. But it's also just sort of the natural mode of human conversation. We start talking to each other about a problem. People will start proposing solutions. They start popping up in our heads almost automatically, start saying them out loud. And this is what ensues in my experience. Somebody says an idea, another person says an idea, another person says an idea, and then they maybe perhaps give a little bit of a sales pitch for their idea. And once the sales pitch has been introduced, it's like a nuclear weapon. Everyone is going to have to sort of escalate. And so, but for some people, this conversing and this pitching and this, sort of it's a lot of talking. And some people find it difficult to participate in brainstorms. I think sometimes it's because people are introverted, but not even always because of that. Sometimes it's just because if you're like me, I love to talk. I love to hear the sound of my own voice. But as soon as somebody else starts talking and saying their idea, I can't think and listen at the same time. So then, of course, this person is just full of ideas and often like floods the market. So what I saw happen actually at Google a lot of times, because many years ago, I used to run group brainstorms at Google and actually facilitate them and, running by sort of the official rules of group brainstorming. And what I saw happen was that often that quiet person would go off on their own. And then when I went back to teams who had run group brainstorms and asked them how it went, they would say, it was really fun. And I'd say, great, what did you build that came out of the group brainstorm? And they would say, oh, actually what happened was so-and-so went off. And so this is what would happen. Somebody would go off on their own. They'd just have some time and they'd think of an idea and they'd think a little bit more about it until it was a detailed solution. And then they would use their superpower. So it might be if it was a product manager, maybe they'd write up a spec or like a presentation about it. A designer might mock it up. Maybe an engineer would build a prototype. And they would come back then to this team who had just these sort of thin ideas, this sort of maybe watered down kind of groupthink. And they'd present like, hey, here's what I came up with. And everybody else was just like, oh, man. So in the design sprint, what I wanted to do was to go from that group brainstorm to instead getting everybody to work alone and everybody to hopefully become a competing version of that lone wolf who could sometimes come up with a solution on their own. So in a sprint, what would happen is everybody would have time to work quietly. We'd work quietly together in the same room. Everybody would come up with an idea. They'd have enough time to turn those ideas into solutions. So they weren't just a very thin kind of abstract thing. And then they would commit them to paper. So everybody would write down their solutions on paper. And then we'd put them up on the wall so that we could evaluate them without worrying about sales pitches, without worrying about the way that people think about me, have slight biases or sometimes strong biases for or against different people on the team. It's all anonymous and all just detailed out on the wall. So on Wednesday, the team would decide among these different solutions. And the default for most teams is discuss. But in a sprint, we do it fast and we do it decisive. And again, we've got those sketches up on the wall. So the team would go around and they would have a structured conversation and make the decision really quite quickly by going through a series of steps. Again, there was all these defaults that happened when people talked, and worse still, I think a lot of decisions that happen in teams happen over email or messaging, or they happen in these broken up bits of conversation. But when we were able to focus and really allow people to get in the zone, look at the solutions in depth, and really do this kind of deeper effort, this deeper thought, we had much better results. So on Thursday, the team would build a prototype, and the default for most teams is to build it right, to really stress and, kind of put off testing things until much later in the process. And in the sprint, we could try things right away. So we would fake it. We would get the team together and we would fake what a finished product might look like. Might fake a website or an app or marketing. There's a lot of different things that we figured out over the years we could simulate in just one day. We could make something that appeared to be realistic, so that when we brought our customers in, at the end, it would look real. There's even a team I talked to who faked a snack bar. They put real packaging on and put it in amongst other snack bars to see how people would react. It turns out that the key to a successful snack bar, and you can check me on this when you go into the grocery aisle, is a plastic window through which you can see chocolate. So that's what the research showed. Okay, so Friday they tested the solutions, and most teams will wait for perfect data. They'll wait and they'll argue, or they'll want scientifically relevant data. And then that stuff is great, but in a sprint you could get something quick and dirty right away, something that would just tell you if your hunch was right before you committed. So we do this with one-on-one interviews. We do 5 one-on-one interviews throughout the day. And then at the end, or during those interviews, the team's watching and taking notes. So what would happen in a sprint was that a team would be able to take more risks. They'd be able to get data sooner. And oftentimes, whereas by default, they'd have to play it safe, they were able to really try something that might have a big reward, but wouldn't be something they'd be comfortable launching or committing to right off the bat. The other thing that was amazing about the sprints and that really, I think, excited us about converting this and adapting it for ourselves was that normally teams were very reactive. They're reacting to messaging, they're reacting to the calendar, but in a sprint, they became focused and they made progress on the most important thing, which was often something that got pushed off or torn into little bits and spread out over weeks and weeks or months and months. The other part about it, just experientially, just when you were in a sprint, there was this shift from feeling like you would describe work as being busy to, in a sprint, you would say, well, it was hard. We worked hard, but it's fun. It's actually really fun to do that hard work, to get into the zone, to spend a long stretch of time working on the thing that really matters, the thing that sometimes you put off. It feels really good. It's satisfying. It's even joyful sometimes. And that was almost the biggest reason why we kept doing it year after year after year, sprint after sprint after sprint. It was satisfying. It felt like we were finally doing the work that mattered, the reason why people had signed up to do their job in the first place. So in 2016, we wrote this book, Sprint, about it, and it started to spread. It had started, at Google with these few teams that I worked with, and started to spread from there within the company. And in Google Ventures, we started working with startups, and it spread kind of into the tech world. And as the book came out, we started to see agencies running sprints, some of them full-time, just doing sprints and nothing else. And it started to spread into bigger, more traditional companies as well. And today, there's even some stories starting to come out where universities are teaching it, or where I'm seeing it in nonprofits and government agencies. So this idea of defaults at work that aren't so good that we should change, it turns out it's everywhere. And everybody would, it seems like, benefit from re-examining them in the office. So the next thing that happened after this was we started to think about, as I said, applying these ideas to ourselves. And this was kind of going on throughout those years at Google Ventures. So John and I were thinking about, okay, so the design sprint is like a quest for the perfect work week. What about the perfect day? Not every week are you in a design sprint. What happens on those other days? How do we get a similar sense of satisfaction? How do we know that we've spent our time well? And to really kind of tee this up, I'll ask you to remember, or I'll just say, if I remember when I had first joined Google, I was so excited about what I was going to be working on there. This was true when I joined Microsoft. When I started my first job in tech at Oakley, many, many years ago, in 1999, I was so excited. Like the first day, the first day at Google, I come in, I'm like, all right, awesome. What are we working on? And my inbox, this is my inbox, right? I have some brand new, I have no emails in my inbox. So I'm like, great, I'm just going to focus on that thing. And I look at my calendars, nothing in the calendar because I'm new. So like, awesome. Just work on the things. It's so great. It's full of sunlight, and start to meet the people who are on my team. I'm like, oh yeah, cool. Like he's my boss. We have a one-on-one later on. And like, yeah, oh good. This person knows a lot about the project. Catch up and start to get on some kind of project meetings, and that's good because we're kind of in the flow. And there's team meetings you should go to. It just feels like you're really picking up a head of steam as this happens. And like, but like pretty soon, like you're in the flow, and then like at some point, I was like, whoa, I gotta color code my calendar so I know what building to go to. Oh, geez. And it's like at some point, it's just realize it's just the calendar. That's all. I'm just bouncing from context to context and project to project and trying to find a small wedge of time. It just feels like I'm just like trying to kind of like survive. Like I just survive the week and make it through the next day, And these are defaults. These are the defaults. At work, we're constantly reacting to the calendar. If somebody invites me to a meeting, of course I'm going to try to go to that meeting. I want to be helpful. I want to be a helpful colleague. I will definitely try to go to that meeting. I'll say yes. So in some places at Google, people could just put meetings on your calendar without even asking you. Just show up. Of course I'll show up. Of course I'll come to the meeting. I want to help. Send me an email. I'm going to reply. I'm going to reply all fast as I can. Send me a Slack message. I'm going to get back to you as quickly as I can. I want to be helpful. So all the time I'm switching contexts. I'm trying to be helpful. And we're all in a circle just bouncing off of each other. Like me in that bathroom, right? So it's like this. It's like, here's me again, right? So here I am. And I know there's this stuff I care about, whether it's a big project at work that I can't quite get to because it's not urgent. It's important, but it's not urgent. Or it's something in my life that really matters to me. For my whole life, I wanted to write books. And I put it off. Something I'll do someday. I'll do that someday. Or I want to spend more time with my kids. I want to be more focused with my kids. But I'll do that someday. I'll do that once I'm a little bit less busy. So this idea of someday, I'm still excited about those things. But when this stuff is going on, it's hard to remember the someday. It gets crowded out. I'm so busy. And as that stuff, I have to start dealing with it. I have to deal with it. And I have to kind of, as soon as one thing gets fixed, it's like another thing comes up. And I'm just kind of like jumping from thing to thing, And so it's exhausting, right? And if you feel exhausted doing this, it's totally normal to feel like you need a break, right? You need a break. But a wonderful thing about the world today is we have all kinds of great ways to take breaks. We've gotten very sophisticated at giving ourselves breaks. We have all this infinite content. It's really good. It's really easy to get to, really easy to use, and it's with you at all times. It's amazing stuff. So if you just will look over here, you're going to see some great stuff. And so don't worry, we got you covered. If you're too stressed out and too burned out and too tired from all that busy stuff, just come on over here. But while you're doing that other stuff is kind of piling up. So you're going to have to go back and take a look at that sooner or later. You're going to be over there again. Then you're probably going to need another break. And so you're going to look back over here, and it's going to be nice. It's going to be really good. But, of course, everything's piling up. So you're going to have to go back over here, and you're going to have to go back over here. And so you could kind of, I think maybe you guys know how this stuff goes. It's just like we're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And we're like me in that bathroom in Japan. These are kind of the defaults. And in our book, we describe these as the busy bandwagon because everybody's doing it. Everybody's busy. Of course we should be busy. Of course we should be responsive. Of course we should be on top of our email. And the infinity pools because there's always something new. There's always something calling to me from my pocket. But what about this stuff? When you're constantly stuck between these two powerful forces and you're constantly getting pulled in both directions, it feels like this stuff is like never going to happen. And, that's sad. So Jake's going to cry a little tear. But so those are the defaults. And what John and I started doing in these kind of experiments that we were running ourselves and starting to write some blog posts about this and kind of try out some of these ideas, sharing them and seeing what other people thought, was the idea of getting rid of some of those defaults on a daily basis. And not just at work, but also in our regular sort of normal lives. We wanted to replace those defaults with a system, but we knew that the system for what we did day to day couldn't be as specific as a system for a design sprint. A design sprint is for a very specific case. You're a team of people, you're working on a big project, you're just starting it off. We know how many people are in the room. We know so many things about what's going on there. But in any person's daily life, even in our own daily lives, it's not that simple. It's not that simple. So we needed something that was more flexible. One thing that became really obvious to us was that willpower was not the way to do this. And as designers, we recognize that small shifts in things over the years have made everything easier and easier and easier to use, easier to get to. And in many ways, that's great. But you can also recreate those defaults. You can create defaults for yourself that make some things a little bit further away and that make the things that matter to you a little bit closer. So that's what make time is all about. And if I go back to that idea of a Jake caught between those two powerful forces, with make time, there's a few small shifts that make a tremendous difference. And for the past few years, for me, and for John as well, it's made a huge, huge difference in the way we approach our lives. So, so here I am again, hi. And so I, if I've got that idea of something that I want to do, this thing that I care about, one of the things that's really crucial, this is a learning from our sprints, is that you've got to have something that is big but doable for today. So not just like a most important task, which is just a task or a to-do list item, something that's big but a focal point. And for us in our sprints, we found that when we made a focal point for each day, map, sketch, decide, prototype, test, it meant that we brought our best energy to the most important part of the day, whether it was making the decision about the map or whether it was finishing up the prototype. And at the end of the day, we were satisfied because we had done that one thing. It was the highlight of our day when we look back. It was the highlight that we did that. So in the make time system, what we talk about is taking that someday thing and making it a bit specific. So you think about something I can do today. What's the thing that today is going to give me the most joy when I look back on the day or make me feel the most satisfied about how my day went? If at the end of the day, somebody said, Jake, what was the highlight of your day? In the morning, I want to start thinking about what that is and starting to protect it in my calendar and make sure I have the energy for it when the time comes. So if I get specific about what that is, something that's going to take 60 to 90 minutes, something that's, meaningful but doable each day, and I kind of write that down, I capture it, I'm already setting myself up for a much more successful day. But doing that doesn't mean that the distractions and all of the busyness, they don't just go away. You can't magically sort of wave a wand and have them disappear. But you can create a little bit of space. And so in the book, we talk about creating some space. We create a little bit of a barrier and just push them a little out of the way. Change expectations with colleagues a little bit. Change the way we use our devices a little bit. A little space combined with this focus of, I know what's most important today, incredibly powerful. And again, we found this in sprints when we required people to start putting away their laptops, putting away their phones, and focusing on the job at hand. It was possible to get into that focused mode because what we were doing was important. If you have the combination of something that's important and you shut off the distractions, then that focus just almost magically appears. It's funny because so much of what we do with our devices, and there's a lot of conversation today about the distractions of our phones, but so much of it is about guilt. So much of it is about, I should feel guilty. All these new features that Apple and Google and Facebook even are rolling out, they're just dialogues that come up and say, hey, you should feel guilty. Hey, you should feel guilty. Or I can go in and see the chart. Oh, look at what a jerk you are. You've been on your phone all the time. It's all stuff that just hit you with a stick, But if instead you change the dialogue and it's like, no, what I want to do this thing. I'm excited about it. And then you know which dials to turn to create that bit of space. Then it's not about guilt, but it's about drawing you. It's about what you want. And it becomes much, much easier. So the third key is energy. And this was something, again, that we were able to tune in our design sprints because we sort of controlled all the variables. We could stock the snacks and we could, provide the coffee instead of soft drinks. We could have bananas instead of candy. Little things made a big difference. We could have people have lunch together, looking face to face and having a conversation, which surprisingly is a huge mood booster. But in a way, it's not so surprising because we're wired, for 200,000 years ago, we were basically the same as we are now. Today, we've got smartphones and, we've got blue jeans and stuff, but we're still basically cave people. And cave people spend a lot of time in small tribes having face-to-face conversations. Today, all of that stuff is intermediated with screens. But if you start to have face-to-face conversations again, just a little bit in your day, it can be a mood boost. And if you eat well, if you take breaks, if you don't work too long in the day, which was another thing we could control in the sprint, all of those things give you the energy that you need. So we found that if you had the energy you had the space away from those distractions, and you knew what you wanted to focus on, again, even if it was just for an hour and a half each day, it was sort of transformative. To actually do that thing, like do the thing that mattered most, which feels so much different. Now, I don't mean to say that the calendar disappears in this world or that the email inbox that's overflowing disappears. It doesn't. The shift is, rather than putting all of that other stuff first, you put yourself first. You put the thing that matters most to you first. Sometimes it'll be something from work. Sometimes it'll be your family. Sometimes it might be a personal project. Like for me, it was writing. For John, it was learning to sail and to maintain a sailboat. If those things start to come first more and more often in your days and your weeks and your months, it's profound. So in the book, which you all have now, in the book, we talk about this as a highlight. So this first idea of having a focal point, we call this a highlight. And like I said, Make Time is not prescriptive in the same way that Sprint is. It's a framework. The system is a framework. And there's 87 tactics that you can use to try to put the framework into action. And I fully expect that all of you have tactics that work for you for some of these things. You'll add tactics or bring tactics of your own to the table when you look at it. But we'll sort of get you started in the book. This second part, this idea of creating a little bit of space, we call that laser mode. So the idea is if we remove a bit of distraction and help you just get started, if you care about the thing, you will snap into this sort of great feeling, super high-powered focus. And finally, this last part we call energize. So as I mentioned, there are tactics for these, right? So there's 16 tactics for setting your highlight and defining something that's doable, that's meaningful to you. There's 27 tactics for building energy, and there are full 43 tactics for laser mode. This is a part that we think is really hard today, but we have a lot of techniques and tricks for making it work. That's what Make Time is fundamentally about. The details of it, of course, matter, and you all will be the judges of whether it makes sense. You'll be the first judges because you are the first people to have this book in your hands. What I hope will happen is that you'll find that the default switches from being fragmented to having some time to focus. And again, I won't promise that everything transforms in your calendar, but if you have some time to focus each day, it changes the way everything feels. If you can switch from focusing on everything at once all of the time to doing one thing at a time, again, even if it's just once per day, it makes a profound difference. If you can switch from being reactive to being more focused, not bouncing between those door frames, that's a powerful change. And again, it can be something small, and it can be just for one time during the day. That can unlock a lot of cascading effects in your life. And finally, I think for me, like this idea of going from this is something I have to wait to do someday to it's something I can make time for today. I can actually do some of this actually today is really powerful. When I started off, I was on this quest to be productive, and we have a failure. We have many failures in the English language. Productive is one of them. Busy is one of them. If somebody asks me how I'm doing or I ask them, our default answer these days is busy. We say, I'm busy. And busy kind of means it's good. I'm important, or maybe it just means like I have work, I have a job, like things are going on. It means that I'm a functioning member of society today, right? Especially here in the Bay Area, right? I'm busy. I'm definitely busy. Don't worry about me. I'm busy. Or you're busy. Yeah, I'm busy too. And that's a failure of the English language. We don't have a good way to say things are full and good and positive. And we just say busy, which is kind of a negative word. It's weird. Productive is another failure. Productive is a word that's like a word for like a factory, like, man, that factory is really productive. It's cranking out those widgets, man. We got to get it a little bit more productive. We got to get some faster machines. Let's oil up those gears. If you're productive, you're just doing stuff fast, but we should aspire to more than that. And I'll suggest that you think about going from being productive to being purposeful. If you can be purposeful in your work, even if you get less done, even if you reply to email slower, say no to more meetings, do fewer projects, keep up with less friends online, don't know what's going on in the breaking news, aren't up on the latest series on HBO or Netflix, and can't have a meaningful conversation about Game of Thrones with your friends at the water cooler, you might find that there's room for that purpose, for the stuff that matters the most. It is ultimately your time, and that's a really important idea. I talked about these two things, work and life, but of course, they're not two things. They're one thing. these moments are everything that we have. And the time that we spend at work is no less important, it's no less a part of our lives than the time that we spend at home, and vice versa. The time that we spend with our families is no less meaningful. We don't get any less positive feedback from our kids than we do from answering an email. We all know that, but sometimes in the moment it's very hard to do it. But these people who we're with at work, they matter. And if we can bring our full attention to them, it matters. Slowing down is a way to do that. Our family, the people that we love, our friends, they're important too. Slowing down and being able to bring attention to them matters. When we're busy, time goes by fast, and we shouldn't want it to go by fast. It goes by much too fast already. That little baby is already 15 years old, and he's in high school now. It's crazy, and I'm sure those of you who have kids, you know what I mean. They're this marker of time that you see grow and change, but everybody knows it. Everybody feels it. Our lives will be at their end before very long. I don't want to end on a down note, but I think it's important to keep in mind. If you want to make time, you have to change defaults. You have to change the game. And it's urgent that you do it now. The stakes are incredibly high. It is your life on the line. Every moment that gets wasted by reacting to Slack and Gmail and the calendar and all of those other infinity pools is a moment that matters. It's your life. It's like somebody just ripped the blood right out of your veins. So don't let it happen. I don't know if the book will help, but I hope it does. You've all got a copy of it. It comes out on September 25th, and you guys can help me out tremendously by taking a look at it and posting an Amazon review if you're so inspired on September 25th. That's incredibly helpful in the early going, surprisingly, if you do that. If you want to set a Google Calendar reminder, not that I'm encouraging you to use your phones or anything, that's super helpful. Also helpful is to recommend it to friends. That's the most powerful way that books and ideas spread, is a personal recommendation. That's really the only way I ever read books, is when somebody personally recommends them to me. I want to thank you guys for your time, for putting up with my first draft of this talk, and for coming out and giving me your time this evening. Like I said, it really is all we have, and I can't give it back to you. I can't give your attention back to you. It's burned. You guys are all 1 hour or maybe more, 2 hours, 2 hours less to live than you did when you came in the door. So I hope you'll get some return on your investment. If you go to maketimebook.com, there's a bonus pack for people who bought the book. If you scroll down to the bottom, you can just type in where it says order number, and you will be good to go. Thank you so much, you guys. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Jake, for an awesome talk. I appreciate it. And so, for those of you that haven't been here before, we use the mics for questions. Raise your hand if you have a question for Jake, and we got some folks, our awesome volunteers, will run them around. If you don't have a mic, don't raise your hand, don't ask a question, okay? That way we can get on the audio too. All right, here we go. First question.
Hi, Jake. Thank you very much for your presentation. You know, we are doing design sprints in the office, and everything you said regarding calendar and kids, I'm also that freak, and I think many people who have kids and work have the same problems. That was really resonating to the problems I'm facing, you know. The last like a few months, I'm using 5-minute journal. I'm not sure if you're aware of that technique, but anyway, the problem I have now is that you still want to create time for something that matters, that's something someday, but that's a big thing. So you need to somehow split it, the couple, into multiple things. It's by some reason, it's easier to do for other people when you're managing projects and people.
Yeah.
How you do that for yourself?
Well, it's true. The hardest thing is to prioritize these things that no one is asking for. And those are the things that matter most. I mean, not that there are many people who are more successful than I am in their careers, but I haven't been able to do a lot of the things that I wanted so far. And very few of the things that were important was anyone ever asking for. Nobody was asking me to do the design sprint process, which was a really satisfying thing for me to work on, but nobody wanted that. Nobody was like, Jake, when are you going to have that done? We've got a milestone. You know, I had to sort of make time to do it. And the same was true for writing. Nobody really was asking for us to write books. We had to sort of make time to do these projects. And it wasn't hard. I mean, the number of days where I'm, supposedly like making time, I'm working on my highlight, I'm sitting at my computer, I have a variety of tools for closing off access to the internet because I have very poor self-control. I need to be restricted. And I'm just staring there, just like pretty much just feeling like an idiot. That's a lot of the time, I think, and it's part of what happens with this is getting comfortable with the frustration and giving yourself enough time, knowing that it's an hour and a half before you'll get into the zone, and also having the confidence that it's the most important project. So just to give away one of the techniques, I don't know exactly what page it's on, but one of the techniques is called stack rank your life. It's very simple. I'm sure that a lot of you have probably done this. You just didn't give it a name and like make it a tactic in the book. But it's just the idea is to identify all the projects that are going on in your life, in your own life, right? Like what are the things that are going on? It might be a big work project, might be something that's going on in your personal life, might be something that you want to do someday, whatever. You stack rank those things and then you just list them out and you put them in the order of importance. And the idea in the book is we want to push you to put the thing that you're really excited about and care about as far up that list as possible. For me, that's clarifying, because if I look at the list of all the things, if I zoom out far enough, it becomes clear that those big things, those someday things, the things that I'm going to have to be diligent on, that are going to take a long time, becomes clear that they do matter. And having that list and referring to that list constantly gives me the confidence to keep after it. But in the moment, when we're zoomed in to the 1 foot level and there are demands from our inboxes or from our colleagues or from people in our family, whatever, it's harder. It's harder. And so I hope that some of the things like that in the book, there's a lot, basically over and over and over again in the book, you'll find one of our philosophies is to try to steer you towards saying, just focus on one thing, and invest in it. And if you invest in it, good things happen. At the end, though, it is on us, in those moments to push through when it sucks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here.
Oh, yeah. The sound is from there, so it's really good.
Great presentation, great concept. Speaking of one thing, actually, there is a book called The One Thing by Gary Keller.
Yeah.
And he says that define one goal for your entire life, for the next 10 years, for the next year, for this month, and for this week, and for today. And then what you can do is put the priority for that one goal and then time block. So let's say today, to achieve this goal, I have to work from 10 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, and then nothing else matters. And then on that period of time, your time is blocked. So it doesn't matter if somebody else or a coworker or your employee want to talk to you, your time is blocked. And I see a lot of similarity between your concept and the concept of the one thing by Gary Keller, because you mentioned that by doing this sprint system, it gives you enough energy, it boosts your energy. And also it's a matter of priorities as well, because working on so many different things and being busy, honestly, it doesn't matter much. It just means that you don't have a good system in place instead of being laser focused on one goal, one project. So I just wanted to thank you for your presentation. And what is the differentiation between your concept and Gary Keller concept?
Well, I am familiar with the book, although I haven't read it all the way through. And the fact that I haven't read it all the way through is not a commentary on it not being a good book, but it's a commentary on the fact that there are a lot of books in this topic. There's a lot of competition. It's like if you go into the App Store and you look under games. It's like there's a lot of people who have good ideas about ways to put games on our phones. And there are a lot of people with good ideas about ways to help us do the things that we want to do, the things that matter to us. I think that it's important to basically keep trying at that, And I think the reason why John and I, I'll be honest with you, John and I both left our jobs at Google Ventures around the same time, but within the last year and a half or so. And John's primary motivation for leaving, the thing that he wanted to go do, was he had been saving up, and as I mentioned, working on learning to do sailboat maintenance and open sea navigation. And he and his wife went on this long, months long sailing trip, and have sort of started on this big adventure in their lives. And what I wanted to do was write fiction. I've been working on fiction books in the background of writing these other books. That's really what I wanted to do. But I realized that John was about to leave and go on this trip, and we had been talking about the idea of doing this book. And I realized that I thought, and we both of us felt, that this was important to invest effort into, because it's funny, at this moment right now, I don't know if this is going to matter. You see that one thing book, it's everywhere. But the problem isn't solved yet. So if the problem was solved, then we wouldn't need to write a book. And so we thought, it still matters. This is still a relevant thing. We've never come across something ourselves that solved it for us. We had to put together our own system. And we felt like the experiences that we had being able to manipulate all those different teams and watch what happened was really unique. And that our experience building software products and John worked on YouTube, one of the biggest and most sophisticated distractors and infinity pools out there. I worked on Gmail, which is not only an infinity pool, but also a busy bandwagon. It's the heart. Email is, a lot of times we don't even think about email because it's so old, but it's like, it doesn't even show up as like a discrete thing on those app trackers. It's just like, productivity. You can feel good about the time you spent on email, but it's the heart of this problem. So we thought that maybe our insights from building those tools and working with all these teams might be useful, and also our experience in trying to make a system that in Sprint that was reusable by others. And so time will tell whether it was worthwhile. I think that if you read 100 books on the topic of time management and focus, and that you'll find a lot of good ideas and a lot of ideas that overlap. But just as you will find when different startups are competing in the same space, some will work for some people and some won't. I hope this one will work for you, for some of you, but I won't guarantee that it's better than other things that are out there, that it's going to be a cure-all for everyone. I just think it's important for us to, as humans, to keep striving and fighting this battle against letting our time slip away, and this is our shot at that.
Question. Yeah. So implementing a design system like this can be a pretty drastic change, and most of us have potentially years of precedent of those defaults.
Yeah.
Right, where everyone's expecting kind of what the status quo.
Yeah.
So how do you manage expectations and gradually roll this out so that you don't piss people off when you make that change?
Yeah, we talk about not pissing people off in the book. I think maybe the first thing that's, and this is interesting for me, this is like Friday of the sprint, because this is the prototype. It's really useful to hear what you guys say. And then one thing I'm thinking is that I need to make clear in the talk is that there are 87 tactics. There's this idea of a system, but we don't expect people to do all of it at once. In fact, don't tell anybody who you recommend the book to, or feel free to. The book is designed so that you can read it from beginning to end, but we don't expect that most people will do that. It's also meant to be flipped through. There's a lot of illustrations, there's a lot of divisions, and you can really treat it almost like a cookbook. You can read the beginning and then you can kind of flip through. And that's kind of the way we imagine people using it. That they'll get the idea of the framework and the armature, sort of, and then they'll flip through and they'll say, sounds interesting. I want to try that. I want to try that and that. And hopefully that leads to trying more and more pieces, and also people coming up with their own approaches that fit into sort of the philosophy or this idea of shifting defaults. But if you make small shifts, and this is something, again, that we noticed in our own personal lives and doing the sprints, those small shifts start to have cascading of positive effects. So I don't expect that you'll have to feel this agony of making a shift into make time. It's more of just like, I'm just starting to see things a little bit differently. And I started to do maybe 2 or 3 things, and I'm starting to just kind of evaluate how those work day to day. And yeah, like some of the stuff with email, which is really the biggest deal. We do talk about kind of phrases you can use or ways you can talk to people about it. That's important. I think that a combination of, just to give away the game a little bit, a combination of telling people, hey, I'm going to be slower to respond than usual because I'm focusing on some important projects, is really powerful. The word because is incredibly, it's magic. There's a study that we refer to in the book about, it's from a long time ago, but it rings true. Where people were basically standing in line for a photocopy machine. So people don't really stand in line for photocopy machines anymore, but in the old days, that was important. And the experiment was, what does it take to cut in that line? What do you have to say to let somebody who's been waiting in line for 30 minutes or an hour to let you? Yeah, you can imagine the TSA line today would be a good proxy to rerun this study. And what they found out was that people would, I can't remember the percent, but it's in the book, people would let you in line if you said, can I go ahead of you because I need to make copies? Which isn't even actually, there's nothing else you could do with a copy machine to make copies. But just because, like, if you said, like, can I go in ahead of you versus can I go ahead of you because I need to make copies? They're like, oh yeah, of course. Like it's just there's something weird about it because it's just like, well, there's logic there. It must make sense. And it's a little bit, it's a little dirty. It's a little dirty because it's a glitch in our human nature. But if you tell people on your team, I'm going to be slower to respond than usual because I'm working on important projects, it gets the because magic. And it's also true. There are things that are more important than responding to email. We all know it. And I struggle with this every day. That's another thing to know. I wrote this book and I struggle with this stuff every single day. I'm tempted by my email and I have to force my way back to stuff that's more important. But that message really helps. It starts to change the expectations. The other thing is, and I think if all of us like think about people that we know, we'll know people that we work with or our friends who are slower to respond than others. Some people respond faster, some are slower. And I think often we're kind of like envious of the person who responds slow. Like there, sometimes maybe it veers into jerkiness, but there's a lot of room between the instant response time that most of us expect of ourselves and the response time that we expect of other people. So I think there's also more leeway than most of us think. So the combination of just doing it and also like providing a little bit of an explanation up front can create a lot of space. And I found that in a lot of different teams working myself. And yeah, the evidence is there in that Xerox research.
Hi.
Hey.
So I've been reading your book while you were speaking. I'm on page 26. So.
I don't know. Okay. All right.
I multitask. So I love this here. We do not.
Nobody else do that. That's not a make time tactic.
A lot of responsibilities. We do not remember days, we remember moments. I really like that because a lot of this is about
That's
work.
a quote from a poet, by the way. We didn't come up with
beautiful.
that.
It's beautiful. And
John found it. I didn't even find it. I can take no credit. I'm like, yeah.
But because a lot of this is very work related, those highlights that you mentioned and those moments. I mean, it's hard when you're working, it's 24/7 and so on. How do you create those moments? I mean, I tend to go and climb mountains and try to get away as far as possible so there's no cell phone reception. So how do you find that with people who can't do that? How do you create those moments? I mean, that's tough stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's an excellent question. My thesis on this, the way I think about it, is that when you're doing, and let's just talk about it at work for a minute, because work is not usually full of those mountaintop moments, but in my career, working on the things that mattered most and working on stuff that was hard those were the mountaintop moments when I could focus. And months could go by where I couldn't remember what happened 2 days ago because it was meetings and email. And then every now and again, there'd be a week where we had a deadline or I was traveling somewhere. So I had to work in a focused time with these other folks on my team. And so we focused on one thing and, it was an intense period of work or we had to get it done for this presentation or for this test or whatever. And it was a focused time or we were about to launch and it was a focused time. And those little moments where we were focused and where there was clarity and where I was doing the thing that I originally excited me about taking the job or starting on the project, those can be highlights. Those can be mountain climbing moments. And I think that I hope that even making a small shift towards finding something each day that you want to be the highlight and even framing it in that way. So much of what we talk about with productivity or trying to get the most of our time management is about things we should do or we must do or squeezing more in or hacking things. And I hope that this framing of find the thing that, at work, it may not be necessarily joyful all the time, but it might be satisfying. And actually framing it in advance as a satisfying thing, a thing you hope to do. And then at the end of the day, looking back and saying, oh, yeah, good, like I did that. That was a highlight or that thing is done. Is a way to, I'm not going to guarantee magic every day and every week, but I think it's a way to find more of those moments. And I've definitely seen that happen in sprints and even in day-to-day work where it was a bigger thing, where it wasn't reactive. Those things kind of emerge from knowing what matters.
Well, why don't we do one last question? Because I know we got some more book signing to do. Jake will hang around. We can do more. We have one last question back there. Yeah, and then we'll break up and give away some books.
Sure. This question's I don't know if I'm too loud right now, but this question's about sort of, you mentioned the importance of energizing, making space. Did you find that there's sort of a good cadence or a certain amount of time that you could focus on a task, and where you schedule in those breaks? Like, I know there's methods like the Pomodoro method where you're like focus on a task for a certain amount of time and then take a 15-minute break. Or in your research or kind of the things that you tried, did you find sort of a good cadence to kind of incorporate that into your day?
Yeah, shortly after joining Google, I met this guy named Charles Warren, and he taught me how to facilitate workshops, which became for me it was one of the most valuable things I ever learned, because it helped me to be able to put on these design sprints and run all of those experiments and do that. But something he taught me on the first day that I met him, and that he was sort of instructing me on this, that has held true and is very powerful learning, is that, Jake, you need to remember that the limit of the human bladder is 90 minutes. And so when you design the schedule, don't go longer than 90 minutes to any section of what you do. And so if you look at the checklist at the back of a sprint book, you'll see that the work happens in 90-minute increments. In a work day, we would do 4 90-minute increments. So we do 90-minute increment, a break, another 90-minute increment, lunch, and then 2 more 90-minute increments. If you're doing the math at home, that's less than an 8-hour day, but you can accomplish way more than you could in a normal, like, full 40-hour week. And you could have longer lunches and longer breaks if you're really focused during those times. And so in Make Time, we talk about a highlight being a 60 to 90-minute activity. So personally, I mean, everybody's mileage may vary, and a lot of people have great results with, like, Pomodoro, for example. But personally, it's nice for me to know with an hour and a half that I have enough time to get into it, because I'm not going to, like, snap the first minute, be focused. So if I've protected enough time in my schedule, if I've cleared things off a little bit, or if I've started early, or I'm staying up late or whatever to make time for that thing, and I know that I have some time and I don't have to stress about getting into it at the beginning, but I can kind of just naturally get in, then it's enough time to get in. And it's also short enough that I won't feel the stress of, like, my God, I'm going to be here for 4 hours, or my God, I have to go to the bathroom, or whatever. Like, there is that chance to do something else and shift at the end. Oftentimes, when the schedule is not packed, when there's not things afterwards, 90 minutes will turn into something longer. But we think 60 to 90 is a really nice sweet spot target. It enables you to take on something that's more meaningful, that's more of a, I like to use this metaphor, and I don't use it in the book, but I've taken to using it lately, of building a pyramid. Like, a lot of those things you want to do that are big projects, it's like building a pyramid. And every one of those 60 to 90-minute blocks of time, it's like a brick. And, if you cannot get distracted the whole time, then you can cut the block out of the stone and then, like, stack it on the foundation. And if you do get distracted, there's studies that show it takes 23 minutes to get back on task after being distracted. So if we can protect enough time to just cut a brick and put it on the foundation, those add up over time. But most of the time, we can't even cut the brick. On that note, thank you all so much.
Cool. Let's give Jake another round of applause.